My name is Karim Al-Nouri, and if you had met me 5 years ago, you would have sworn I was the last man on earth who would ever bow his knee to Jesus Christ. I was a Qatar Air senior pilot with 15 years of spotless service, a devout Muslim who had flown to over 60 countries carrying the faithful to Mecca. On November 4, 2018, I burned 3 Bibles at Atlanta Airport, believing I was defending the honor of Islam. I had no idea that Jesus was about to shatter my perfect life, and then rebuild it into something I never knew was possible. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. I was born in Doha, Qatar, into what most people would call religious royalty. My father, Rashid Al-Nouri, wasn't just a believer. He was a high-ranking Islamic lecturer who traveled throughout the Gulf states teaching advanced Quranic interpretation to other imams. When he spoke, hundreds of men would gather to listen, hanging on every word as if Allah himself was speaking through him. My mother, Layla, ran Quran recitation classes for women throughout our district, her voice so beautiful that people said listening to her was like hearing the angels themselves. From the moment I took my first breath, I was surrounded by the call to prayer, the melodic chanting of Arabic verses, and the unshakable certainty that Islam was not just truth, it was the only truth. Our home wasn't just religious, it was a training ground for spiritual warriors. While other fathers took their sons to soccer matches or the beach, mine took me to the mosque before sunrise, teaching me to prostrate myself before I could even tie my own shoes. I was the son every Muslim family dreams of raising. The perfect child. The living example. While other boys in our neighborhood were sneaking out to watch football or getting into mischief, I was memorizing the Quran. By age 10, I could recite 15 complete surahs from memory without a single mistake. By 13, I had memorized over half the entire holy book, all 114 chapters, thousands of verses committed to memory in classical Arabic. When guests visited our home, my father would call me into the living room like a prized possession. Karim, recite Surah Al-Baqarah for our brothers. And I would stand there, eyes closed, and let the words flow for 45 minutes straight while grown men nodded in reverence. The elders would shake my father's hand afterward and say, "Rashid, Allah has blessed you with a lion. This boy will lead thousands to paradise." Ask yourself this question: have you ever felt the weight of being someone's greatest achievement? That was my entire childhood. I wasn't just Karim. I was Rashid Al-Nouri's son. The boy who never missed Fajr prayer, even when I had fever. The teenager who fasted during Ramadan without a single complaint, even when my friends snuck food behind their parents' backs. The young man who studied Arabic grammar until midnight because understanding every nuance of Allah's commands wasn't optional, it was everything. My friends at school sometimes called me Al-Sheikh, the religious scholar, half as a joke, half in genuine respect. While they were discovering music and movies and all the distractions of adolescence, I was discovering deeper levels of devotion. When other teenagers started questioning their parents' beliefs or pushing boundaries, I only burrowed deeper into mine. I would wake at 4:30 a.m. to join my father at the mosque, sitting cross-legged on the prayer rugs as dawn broke over Doha, feeling the absolute certainty that this was what it meant to be alive. The structure, the discipline, the unwavering sense of right and wrong, it didn't feel restrictive. It felt like armor. Like I was building an unshakable fortress around my soul that nothing could penetrate. I knew exactly who I was. I knew exactly what Allah expected. And I was determined to be perfect. My dream from age 12 was to become a pilot. But not for the reasons most boys dream of flying. I didn't want adventure or travel or the romance of soaring above the clouds. I wanted to serve the Ummah, the global Muslim community. I would lie awake at night imagining myself at the controls of a massive aircraft, transporting thousands of faithful believers to Mecca for Hajj, facilitating the most sacred pilgrimage of their lives. What could be more noble than that? What profession could bring more honor to Allah? When I told my father about this vision, he didn't dismiss it as childish fantasy. He placed his hand on my head and quoted the Quran, and whoever strives only strives for the benefit of himself. Then he smiled. If this is Allah's will for you, Kareem, nothing will stop it from happening. But you must work as if everything depends on you, and trust as if everything depends on him. Those words became my motto. I attacked my studies like they were acts of worship. Mathematics, physics, English, meteorology, every subject that stood between me and a pilot's license became a holy conquest. While my classmates celebrated passing grades, I wouldn't accept anything less than perfect scores. Not because I was naturally brilliant, but because I believed Allah was watching every effort, weighing every intention. When I turned 19, Qatar's aviation sector was booming. The nation was positioning itself as a global airline hub, and Qatar Airways was expanding rapidly. It seemed like perfect timing, Allah opening the door I had been preparing for my entire life. I enrolled in their cadet program, one of 3,000 applicants competing for 50 positions. I made it. The training was brutal, 18-hour days, technical exams that eliminated half the class, flight simulations that revealed who truly had the mental toughness for the cockpit. But I thrived. Not because flying came naturally to me, but because I had spent my entire life practicing discipline, focus, and unwavering commitment. Every training flight, I would whisper a prayer before touching the controls. Every successful landing, I would thank Allah under my breath. By 2003, at age 21, I held my commercial pilot's license. The day I received it, I didn't celebrate with classmates or go out for dinner. I went straight to the mosque, prostrated myself in the empty prayer hall, and wept. Everything I had worked for was coming together exactly as I had dreamed. My father's words echoed in my mind, if this is Allah's will, nothing will stop it. And nothing had. Within 6 months, Qatar Air offered me a position as a junior first officer. I was 22 years old, flying international routes, and living the dream I had visualized since childhood. Dubai to London. Doha to New York. Doha to Atlanta. Every flight felt like a sacred mission. I wasn't just transporting passengers, I was carrying doctors, engineers, students, families, pilgrims. I was connecting the Muslim world to the rest of humanity. The technical challenges of aviation fascinated me, but what I loved most were the prayer times at 35,000 feet. There's something transcendent about bowing toward Mecca when you're cruising above the clouds, closer to heaven than anyone on the ground below. I kept a small prayer rug rolled up in my flight bag, and during layovers in foreign airports, I would find quiet corners, storage rooms, empty gates, even behind luggage trolleys, to fulfill my 5 daily prayers. Other crew members, especially the non-Muslim ones, would sometimes watch me with curiosity. Some asked respectful questions. What are you praying for? Why do you pray so many times? I welcomed these conversations. I saw myself as an ambassador, a living example of what true Islam looked like. Disciplined. Respectful. Devoted. I genuinely believed I was representing the best of my faith to a world that had so many misconceptions about Muslims. By 2017, I had achieved everything a man like me could hope for. I had been promoted to senior officer, a position that took most pilots 20 years to reach. I had flown to over 60 countries and transported hundreds of thousands of passengers safely. My record was flawless. Not a single incident, not a single complaint, not a single blemish on my file. But my success wasn't just professional. I was engaged to Amina, the daughter of one of the most respected imams in Doha. She was intelligent, beautiful, and deeply devout, the kind of woman my parents had prayed I would marry. Our families had introduced us, but it wasn't just arrangement, we had genuinely fallen in love. She shared my commitment to living according to Islamic principles. She prayed 5 times daily. She had memorized the Quran herself. Together, we were going to build a home that honored Allah in everything. I was financially secure, respected by my colleagues, beloved by my family, on the path to marriage, rising through the ranks of my airline. On paper, my life was perfect. I felt untouchable, unquestionable, unshakable. I had built my entire existence on the foundation of Islam, and that foundation felt like solid rock. But the true God was about to shatter everything I thought I understood. And it would begin with 3 books, a match, and a moment of rage I could never take back. On that November afternoon, I was exhausted after a long flight and headed into the crew lounge to perform my Asr prayer. As I entered, something felt off. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Usually, there were at least a few crew members scattered around, pilots reviewing flight logs, attendants scrolling through their phones, the hum of the coffee maker providing background noise. But today, the lounge was empty except for the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and 3 books neatly stacked on the corner table near the window. 3 Bibles. Brand new. Hardcover. Unopened. Placed as if they were waiting for someone. As if they were waiting for me. My chest tightened immediately. Heat rushed to my face. I stood frozen in the doorway, prayer rug still tucked under my arm, staring at those books like they were an insult carved in stone. 3 Bibles. In a crew lounge used predominantly by Middle Eastern airlines. In one of the busiest aviation hubs in the world where thousands of Muslim crew members pass through every week. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. This was evangelism disguised as generosity, a calculated attempt to plant seeds of doubt in the hearts of faithful Muslims who were far from home, tired, vulnerable. My father's voice echoed in my mind as clearly as if he were standing beside me. Their book is altered, Kareem. Corrupted by men who twisted the words of the prophets to suit their desires. Their worship is misguided. They claim God has a son, blasphemy of the highest order. Guard your heart against their deception. I had always viewed Christianity as a deviated religion, a faith that had started with truth but had been corrupted beyond recognition. Muslims respected Jesus as a prophet, yes, but Christians had turned him into something he never claimed to be. They worshipped a man. They prayed to statues. They ate pork and drank alcohol and abandoned the laws that God had clearly established. And now, here in Atlanta, someone had the audacity to leave their corrupted scriptures in our space. In a lounge where Muslim pilots came to pray. To rest. To prepare themselves spiritually for the sacred responsibility of carrying passengers safely across the skies. The outrage rose in me like fire catching dry grass. Before I could think it through, before I could talk myself down, I crossed the room and grabbed all 3 books. They were heavier than I expected, thick, leather-bound, expensive-looking. Whoever left them here had invested money in this. That made it worse somehow. More intentional. More offensive. I stormed out of the lounge, my prayer forgotten, and headed toward the side exit that led to the restricted maintenance zone behind Terminal F. My heart pounded. My jaw clenched. I felt righteous anger coursing through my veins, the kind of anger I imagined the Prophet Muhammad must have felt when he cleansed the Kaaba of idols. The maintenance zone was deserted, just a stretch of asphalt littered with equipment crates and a large metallic dumpster pushed against the chain-link fence. The autumn air was cold, but I barely felt it. I pulled out the cigarette pack I kept for stressful layovers, a small vice I never admitted to anyone, and struck a match. The first page curled instantly as the flame touched it. I watched, almost mesmerized, as the fire began to devour the gilt-edged paper. The words, Holy Bible, blackened and disappeared. I fed the second book to the flames. Then the third. The pages folded and twisted as they burned, curling inward like defeated wings, collapsing into ash. To me, in that moment, it felt holy. Righteous even. A small but significant victory for Allah. I stood there watching until all 3 books were nothing but smoldering remains, then kicked the ashes into the dumpster and walked back toward the terminal. My hands smelled like smoke. My heart was still racing. But I felt vindicated. Justified. Like I had defended the honor of Islam in a small but meaningful way. I went back to the lounge, spread my prayer rug in the corner, and performed ASR prayer with a clear conscience. But looking back now, standing here 5 years later with everything I lost and everything I gained, I can see the truth with perfect clarity. That was the moment everything began to unravel. That was the moment I declared war on a God I didn't understand. And that was the moment he decided to respond. 48 hours later, I was cruising at 39,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean when my perfect world began to crack. The flight was routine, Doha to New York, a route I had flown hundreds of times. We were 5 hours in, halfway across the ocean, when I reached forward to adjust the autopilot settings. My fingers touched the control panel, and the entire main display flickered like a dying light bulb. Then it went completely black. 3 full seconds of total darkness on the primary flight instruments. The altitude indicator disappeared. The heading display vanished. The airspeed gauge went blank. For 3 eternal seconds, I was flying blind at nearly the speed of sound with 240 passengers behind me. My co-pilot, Yazin, jerked upright in his seat. What just happened? The backup panel stayed on, thank God, or Allah, or whoever was listening, but the main display I relied on every single day had just behaved like someone had yanked the power cord. Then, as suddenly as it had died, everything came back. All the instruments lit up again, displaying normal readings as if nothing had happened. Did you see that? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. See it? Kareem, the whole panel went dark. Yazin was already reaching for the communication system. We need to report this immediately. We did. We followed every protocol. After landing in New York, maintenance crews swarmed the aircraft, running diagnostics, checking connections, testing every circuit in the avionics system. They found nothing wrong. Clean bill of health, the lead technician told me, tapping his diagnostic tablet. Whatever happened up there, it's not showing up in any of our systems. Everything's functioning perfectly. I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to believe this was just a random electrical glitch, the kind of anomaly that happens once in a million flight hours. But the next day, on the return flight to Doha, it happened again. This time, I was adjusting the throttle when the display sputtered violently, flickering on and off like a strobe light. Yazin reached over instinctively to help, his hand closing over the throttle control, and everything immediately stabilized. We stared at each other. Touch it again, he said quietly. I did. The moment my fingers made contact, the displays went berserk, numbers scrambling, warning lights flashing randomly, the entire panel behaving like it was possessed. Yazin pulled his hand back, and I released the throttle. Everything calmed down. Brother, he whispered, his eyes wide with something between confusion and fear, something is wrong with you, not the aircraft. He meant it as a joke, at least, his mouth was smiling. But his eyes weren't. His eyes showed genuine unease, like he had just witnessed something that violated the natural order of things. I forced a laugh. "Don't be ridiculous. It's just electrical interference. Maybe static from my watch or something." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The malfunctions continued throughout the flight. Small things at first, flickering displays, momentary glitches, but always when I touched the controls. Other crew members started noticing. The flight engineer kept glancing at me with suspicious eyes. During our descent into Doha, I heard whispers behind me in the galley. "Did you see how the panel keeps acting up when Captain Al-Nouri's flying? Third time this week. Always his flights. Think he's hiding a medical condition?" My professional pride, carefully built over 15 years of flawless service, began to crumble. I was Karim Al-Nouri, the pilot with the perfect record, the man who never made mistakes, the devout Muslim who had Allah's favor in everything he did. How could this be happening to me? I tried to rationalize it. Stress. Fatigue. Maybe I was working too many hours. Maybe the engagement preparations with Amina were affecting me more than I realized. Maybe I needed a vacation, some time away from the cockpit to reset. But rationalization couldn't explain why the malfunctions only happened when I touched the controls. It couldn't explain why other pilots could operate the same aircraft without a single issue. It couldn't explain the timing, starting exactly 48 hours after I burned those books. No, that was crazy thinking. Superstitious nonsense. There was no connection between burning some Christian propaganda and aircraft electrical systems. That would violate everything I understood about cause and effect, about the physical laws that governed aviation, about reality itself. And yet, I told myself it was a coincidence. A strange, unsettling coincidence that would eventually be explained by maintenance crews or medical tests or some rational, scientific answer. But deep down, in a place I wasn't ready to acknowledge yet, I knew the truth. Something had changed the moment those pages turned to ash. And whatever I had awakened wasn't finished with me yet. That week, sleep became impossible. Every night, the same dream. I would close my eyes in my apartment in Doha, and immediately I was back in that maintenance zone behind Terminal F. But this time, everything moved in slow motion. I watched my hand strike the match, watched the flame touch the first page, watched the fire spread like liquid gold across the leather covers. Then the pages began to lift. Not falling as ash, but rising, flying into the sky like glowing embers carried by an invisible wind. Hundreds of burning pages swirling upward into darkness, illuminating the night like fireflies made of scripture. And standing in the center of the flames, motionless and silent, was a tall figure. I never saw his face. The light was always too bright, or the smoke too thick, or my own terror too overwhelming. But I felt his presence, an overwhelming sense of being watched, being known, being seen in a way that stripped away every defense I had ever built. And every night, I would wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. But worse than the nightmares was the smell. Burning paper. It followed me everywhere. At home, I would walk into my kitchen and smell it, acrid, unmistakable, like someone had just extinguished a fire. In hotel rooms during layovers, I would wake at 3 a.m. choking on the phantom scent of smoke. Even at 37,000 feet, strapped into the pilot's seat with recycled air pumping through the cabin ventilation system, I would smell it. Burning pages. Charred leather. Ash. Do you smell that? I asked Yazin during a flight to London. He sniffed the air. Smell what? Smoke. Like burning paper. He looked at me strangely. "No, brother. I don't smell anything." I asked the flight attendants. I asked the flight engineer. I asked passengers during deplaning. No one else smelled it. Only me. A constant, inescapable reminder of what I had done, following me like a ghost I couldn't shake. I visited a doctor, convinced something was medically wrong. Maybe a brain tumor pressing on the olfactory center. Maybe some kind of neurological disorder. The blood tests came back normal. The brain scans showed nothing unusual. The stress evaluation concluded I was handling pressure well, perhaps even better than most pilots. "Everything looks perfectly healthy, Captain Olnori," the doctor said, smiling. "You're in excellent physical condition. Everything normal, except my life." I couldn't tell my family. How could I explain to my father, the respected Islamic lecturer, that I was being haunted after burning Christian books? He would either dismiss it as stress or accuse me of hidden sin. My mother would worry herself sick. My siblings would think I was losing my mind. I couldn't tell Amina. We were supposed to be married in 6 months. What would I say? "Darling, I'm being tormented by supernatural forces after committing what I thought was a righteous act?" She would question my faith, my stability, my fitness to be her husband. And I absolutely could not tell my colleagues. One word about hallucinations or psychological disturbances, and my career would be over. The aviation industry has zero tolerance for pilots experiencing mental health issues. I would be grounded, evaluated, possibly lose my license permanently. So I suffered in silence, trapped in a prison of my own making. I tried everything Islam taught me. I added extra prayers, waking for tahajjud in the middle of the night, prostrating myself until my forehead ached. I visited an imam in Dubai, a man known for spiritual wisdom, and asked him about spiritual warfare without giving details. "Increase your Quran recitation," he advised. "The words of Allah are protection against all evil." I recited Quran for hours. Surah Al-Baqarah, known as the chapter that drives away demons. Ayat al-Kursi, the verse of the throne, considered the most powerful protection in Islam. I played Quran recitation in my apartment continuously, surrounding myself with the holy words I had memorized since childhood. Nothing worked. If anything, the presence grew stronger. More insistent. More impossible to ignore. The nightmares intensified. The smell became more frequent. The instrument malfunctions continued. And underneath it all, I felt something, someone, watching me with an attention that was patient, unwavering, and terrifyingly personal. I began to dread sleep. I began to dread flying. I began to dread being alone with my own thoughts. Who was watching me? And why wouldn't he leave me alone? 2 weeks after burning the Bibles, I received my flight assignment, Doha to Atlanta. Flight QR 741. Departure time 2:35 a.m. My first return to that airport since the incident. The dread hit me the moment I saw the schedule. A cold, heavy weight settled in my chest that I couldn't shake, couldn't rationalize away. I considered calling in sick, something I had never done in 15 years of flying. But what would I say? That I was afraid of an airport? That I had a bad feeling? I reported for duty. From the moment we pushed back from the gate, everything felt wrong. The pre-flight checks were normal. The weather reports were standard. But there was a tension in the air, a sense of impending disaster that made my hands clammy against the controls. Yazin noticed. "You all right, brother? You look pale." "Fine," I lied. just tired. We climbed to cruising altitude without incident. Crossed over Saudi Arabia, then Turkey, then Europe. For a few hours, I almost convinced myself the dread was just anxiety, just my mind playing tricks after 2 weeks of sleepless nights. Then we entered US airspace. The altitude gauge suddenly dropped 10,000 feet in an instant, then snapped back to the correct reading. My heart lurched. Yazin grabbed the controls instinctively. Did you just see? The radio channels began scrambling. Voices overlapped, controllers from different airports, frequencies bleeding into each other, creating an incomprehensible cacophony of instructions that made no sense. Qatar 741, descend to. Report position. Weather advisory for. The flight path map on the navigation display froze, then warped, showing our aircraft somewhere over the Pacific Ocean despite being above the Atlantic. Then the cabin lights began flickering, not the gentle dimming for passenger comfort, but violent strobing like lightning trapped inside the fuselage. Passengers started murmuring nervously behind us. What's happening? Yazin's voice was tight. I don't know. I don't. Then everything went dead. Complete avionics blackout. Every screen, every display, every instrument went dark simultaneously. No navigation. No communication. No autopilot. The cockpit fell into eerie silence except for the mechanical hum of the engines I could no longer monitor or control electronically. Outside the windscreen, thick, impenetrable clouds. Zero visibility. I glanced at the fuel gauges, analog backup still working, and my blood ran cold. We were running lower than we should be. Much lower. 181 passengers behind me. Families. Children. People who trusted me to bring them home safely. Mayday, mayday. Yazin was screaming into the dead radio. Qatar 741, we have total system failure. Mayday. Nothing. The radio was completely dead. No one could hear us. No one knew we were dying. The plane lurched violently, dropping like an elevator with cut cables. Screams erupted from the cabin. My hands trembled so badly I could barely grip the yoke. In 15 years of flying, through storms, through emergencies, through every scenario they trained us for, I had never felt this. Pure, absolute terror. For the first time in my career, the thought crystallized with horrible clarity, we're going to die. Kareem! Yazin was pulling on the controls beside me, trying to stabilize the aircraft manually, but without instruments, without visibility, without any reference point, we were flying blind into oblivion. The plane dropped again. More screams. Something shattered in the cabin, probably overhead compartments breaking open. My hands were shaking so violently I couldn't hold the yoke steady. This is how it ends, I thought. This is my punishment. Then, through the dead cockpit speakers, a voice. Calm. Clear. Authoritative. Kareem, lift the nose. You are not alone. I froze. That voice hadn't come through the radio. The radio was dead. It wasn't Yazin, he was staring at the speakers in shock. It wasn't a controller. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a voice speaking directly to me. My hands moved before my mind could process what was happening. I pulled back on the yoke, lifting the nose just as the voice had instructed. And the moment I did, every instrument lit up simultaneously, blazing to life as if someone had flipped a master switch. Navigation, communication, autopilot, everything restored in an instant. The clouds outside the windscreen parted like a curtain being pulled back, revealing clear sky and the distant lights of the Georgia coast. The plane stabilized. Not gradually, not through aerodynamic adjustment, but immediately, as if an invisible hand had reached out and caught us mid-fall. The cabin fell silent. Even the passengers stopped screaming. Yazin turned to me slowly, his face drained of color. Kareem, who was that? I couldn't speak. My hands were still gripping the yoke, knuckles white, entire body trembling. Who was that? He repeated, his voice barely a whisper. I had no answer. We landed in Atlanta 17 minutes later. The smoothest landing of my life, though I barely remember doing it. My hands moved on autopilot, following procedures drilled into me through thousands of hours of training. But my mind was somewhere else entirely. I had been saved. We had all been saved. But by whom? And why? The passengers deplaned slowly, gathering their belongings, completely unaware of how close they had come to death. I heard them chatting in the jet bridge, complaining about the turbulence, discussing their connecting flights, laughing about vacation plans. Normal. Mundane. Alive. The flight attendants filed out. Then the ground crew. Finally, Yazin stood and gathered his flight bag. Are you coming? He asked quietly. In a minute, I managed. I need to finish the post-flight checklist. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the questions in his eyes. Questions he didn't know how to ask. Questions I didn't know how to answer. Kareem, what happened up there? I don't know. He nodded slowly, then left. I sat alone in the cockpit, still strapped into my seat, hands trembling in my lap. The instrument panels glowed softly in the dimmed lighting. Outside, ground crews moved around the aircraft, performing their routine tasks. Everything was normal. Except nothing would ever be normal again. I tried to pray. Reached for the familiar Arabic phrases I had recited 10,000 times. Alhamdulillah. Allahu Akbar. But the words died in my throat. For the first time in my life, the prayers felt hollow. Empty. Like speaking to someone who wasn't listening. Then, a warmth. Not heat, but warmth, the kind you feel standing near someone you love. It spread through the cockpit, filling the space behind me with a presence so tangible I could feel it pressing against my back. The hair on my neck stood up. Slowly, my heart hammering, I turned around. A man stood in the cockpit doorway. He was dressed in white, not the white of clothing, but white like light itself, like he was woven from illumination. He stood where no one had been seconds before, where no one could have entered without me hearing the door, where physics and reality said no one should be able to stand. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't look away. His face. How do you describe something that breaks every category your mind has for beauty? Not handsome in the way we use that word. Not attractive in any human sense. But perfect. Complete. Like looking at the answer to a question you didn't know you were asking. But it was his eyes that destroyed me. They held a love I had never seen in any human being. Not my father's pride when I recited Quran. Not my mother's affection. Not even Amina's tender gaze. This was something else entirely, a love that saw everything I had ever done, everything I had ever been, every dark corner of my soul I kept hidden even from myself. And there was no anger. No accusation. No condemnation. Just love. He didn't speak with his lips. But I heard the words as clearly as if they had been spoken aloud, heard them not in my ears but inside me, resonating in a place deeper than thought. Why are you persecuting my word? The question shattered something in my chest. Because I knew, instantly, with a certainty that bypassed all logic and theology and everything I had been taught, I knew who he was. Jesus. Not the prophet of Islam I had learned about. Not Isa, the messenger who would one day return. But Jesus. The Jesus that Christians worshipped. The Jesus I had been taught to deny. The Jesus whose word I had burned. Everything I had been taught said this couldn't be real. This was deception, spiritual warfare, a jinn taking the form of something sacred to lead me astray. My father's voice screamed in my memory, "Guard your heart against their deception." But every fiber of my being, every cell in my body, every molecule of my soul knew the truth. This was real. This was him. Then he spoke again, and the words broke me completely. I saved you because I love you. Terror and awe collided inside me. I wanted to run. I wanted to prostrate myself. I wanted to deny what I was seeing. I wanted to surrender completely. Every contradiction, every theological argument, every certainty I had built my life upon crumbled like sand castles before a wave. I don't. I can't. The words came out as broken whispers. You're not. You can't be. But he was. He was standing there, looking at me with those eyes, those impossible eyes that held more love than I had ever imagined could exist. And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. The light faded. The warmth dissipated. The cockpit fell back into ordinary darkness, lit only by the glow of instrument panels and the distant floodlights outside. But my heart was no longer the same. I sat there for an hour. Maybe longer. Time had lost all meaning. Ground crew knocked on the door eventually, asking if everything was okay. I nodded mutely, gathered my things on autopilot, walked through the terminal like a ghost. Everything I had believed was shattered. Every foundation I had built my identity upon had been torn away. The Quran I had memorized. The prayers I had recited. The righteousness I had cultivated. The perfect Muslim life I had constructed. All of it, rubble. But I couldn't deny what I had seen. Couldn't rationalize it away. Couldn't explain it as hallucination or stress or spiritual deception. I had met him. The real him. And he had looked at me, a man who had burned his word, with love. The man who walked out of that cockpit was not the same man who had walked in. The war for my soul was over. Jesus had won. I called Amina 3 days later from my hotel room in Atlanta. My hands shook as I held the phone. I had rehearsed what to say 100 times, but when I heard her voice, sweet, trusting, expecting wedding plans, all my careful words evaporated. Amina, something happened. Something I need to tell you. What's wrong? You sound strange. So I told her. Everything. The Bibles. The nightmares. The flight. The voice. The encounter in the cockpit. Jesus. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the connection had dropped. Amina? You've lost your mind. Her voice was barely a whisper. Or you've been deceived by jinn. Kareem, what you're describing, it's spiritual warfare. You need to see an imam immediately, you need. It wasn't a deception. It was real. It was him. Don't say that. Now she was crying. Don't you dare say that. You're talking about shirk, the unforgivable sin. Kareem, please, tell me you don't believe what you're saying. I can't go back, Amina. I can't unsee what I saw. She hung up. An hour later, I received a text from her father: the engagement is terminated. Do not contact my daughter again. May Allah guide you back to the truth. I stared at the message until the screen went dark. Telling my family was worse. I flew back to Doha, walked into my parents' home, the home I'd grown up in, filled with Quranic calligraphy and the scent of incense, and confessed everything to my father. He didn't interrupt. Didn't speak. Just sat in his chair, fingers steepled, face growing darker with every word I spoke. When I finished, the silence was suffocating. Then he stood, walked to the door, and opened it. Get out of my house. Father, please. You are no longer my son. His voice was ice. You have brought shame upon our family name, rejected the Prophet, committed apostasy. As far as I am concerned, Kareem al-Nouri died today. My mother stood in the doorway to the kitchen, tears streaming down her face, but she said nothing. My siblings wouldn't even look at me. Within the hour, I received calls from two of them, their voices tight with anger, telling me never to contact the family again. News spread through the Muslim community in Doha like wildfire. The respected pilot. The Imam's protege. The perfect son who had turned his back on Islam for Christianity. Qatar Air terminated my employment within 48 hours. The official reason was irreconcilable differences in values alignment. The real reason was whispered in every crew lounge from Doha to Dubai: Kareem al-Nouri had converted. Kareem al-Nouri was an apostate. My 15-year spotless record meant nothing. The thousands of flight hours, the promotions, the respect I had earned, erased. Worse, word spread through the Middle Eastern aviation network. Emirates wouldn't hire me. Etihad wouldn't interview me. I was blacklisted before I could even apply. My career, the calling I believed Allah had given me, was destroyed. Within a week, I received messages warning me not to return to Qatar. Not explicit threats, but clear enough. Your presence would be problematic. People are very angry. For your own safety, perhaps it's better if you stay away. So I stayed in Atlanta. Not because I wanted to, but because I had nowhere else to go. I moved into a cheap hotel on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where the carpet smells like mildew and the neon sign flickers all night. My savings, once substantial, began dwindling. No job. No family. No fiancé. No home. Everything I had built for 15 years, gone. I spent days staring at the water-stained ceiling, wrestling with a question that consumed me: did I make the right choice? I could recant. Call my father, tell him I'd been confused, deceived, temporarily insane. Beg forgiveness from the Imam, perform public repentance, reclaim my life. The temptation was crushing. But something had changed. The nightmares, the burning books, the figure in the flames, had stopped completely. The smell of smoke that had haunted me for weeks had vanished. And in place of the terror that had gripped me since burning those Bibles, there was peace. Not happiness. Not comfort. Not certainty about the future. But peace. A deep, inexplicable peace that made no logical sense. I had lost everything, and yet lying in that cheap hotel bed, broken alone and cut off from everyone I'd ever known, I felt a presence with me. Not terrifying this time. Not accusing. Comforting. Like someone sitting in the darkness beside me, saying without words, I'm here. You're not alone. Jesus. The same Jesus who had appeared in the cockpit. The same Jesus whose word I had burned. The same Jesus I had been taught to fear and reject. He was with me in the wreckage. I wept then, not from grief, but from something else. Something I didn't have words for. A breaking and a healing happening simultaneously. I had lost everything the world said mattered. But I had gained the one thing I didn't know I needed, Jesus. The church found me before I found them. I was sitting on a bench outside my hotel one Sunday morning, watching people drive past to wherever people go on Sundays, when an older man stopped and asked if I needed anything. "I'm fine," I said, though everything about me, the rumpled clothes, the hollow eyes, the defeated posture, screamed otherwise. "You don't look fine, son." He smiled gently. "My name's Pastor David. There's a church down the street, nothing fancy, just a small congregation. We are about to start service. You're welcome to join us." I almost said no. But something in his eyes reminded me of the eyes I'd seen in the cockpit. Not the same, but similar. Kind. Genuinely caring. "Okay," I heard myself say. The church was tiny, maybe 50 people in a converted warehouse with folding chairs and a makeshift stage. But when I walked in, something broke inside me. They were singing, hands raised, faces lit with joy, and the words of the song cut straight through every defense I had left. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me." I stood in the back and wept. After the service, Pastor David found me. I told him everything, expecting judgment, expecting suspicion, expecting to be sent away. Instead, he put his hand on my shoulder and said 6 words that changed everything. "Welcome home, brother. You're family now." The church rallied around me in ways I'd never experienced. A family offered their spare room, free, no questions asked. Others brought groceries. Someone found me clothes that actually fit. They didn't treat me like a project or a charity case. They treated me like I belonged. For the first time in my life, I experienced genuine fellowship. Not religious performance. Not competition over who was most devout. Just people who loved Jesus, loving each other. Pastor David gave me a Bible, hardcover, leather-bound, identical to the ones I had burned. "Start with the Gospel of John," he said. I opened it that night with trembling hands, expecting I don't know what. Condemnation, maybe. Confusion. The same distant, legalistic commands I'd found in the Quran. Instead, I found this: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I read all night. Couldn't stop. The words came alive in a way Scripture never had before. Not rules to follow, but a story, God pursuing humanity, pursuing me, not because I was righteous but because He loved me. For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish but have eternal life. I finally understood why Jesus had saved me. Not just from death at 37,000 feet, but for something more: relationship. Not religion, but relationship. 3 months later, I was baptized in a portable pool set up in the church warehouse. As Pastor David lowered me under the water and raised me back up, I felt layers of shame and guilt and religious burden wash away. The old Kareem, the perfect Muslim, the righteous pilot, the man who had burned Bibles, died in that water. The man who rose was someone new. Provision came slowly, but it came. A regional American airline, nothing like Qatar Air's prestige, offered me a position. The pay was half what I'd made before. The routes were domestic, not international. But I could fly again. My calling, somehow, had been redeemed. Why would you hire me? I asked the hiring manager during the interview, after explaining my situation. He smiled. Because everyone deserves a second chance. And because I'm a Christian who believes in redemption. 6 months into the job, I met Sarah. She was a volunteer at the church, organizing the food pantry, and the first time I saw her, she was laughing with a homeless man while stacking cans of soup. Beautiful, but not in the way Amina had been beautiful. Sarah's beauty came from somewhere deeper, a joy that seemed unshakable, a kindness that felt effortless. We became friends first. Then something more. She never knew the old Kareem, never saw the man I used to be. She only knew who I was now, broken, rebuilding, learning to follow Jesus one stumbling step at a time. I don't care about your past, she told me one evening as we walked through the park. God's already dealt with that. I care about who you're becoming. We were married a year later in the same warehouse where I'd been baptized. Pastor David officiated. My church family filled the chairs, the new family God had given me when my old family walked away. It wasn't the wedding I'd once imagined. It was better. People started asking me to share my testimony. First at my church, then at others. Word spread, the Muslim pilot who met Jesus in a cockpit. Some Muslims who heard my story mocked me online. Called me a traitor, an apostate, a fool. But others reached out privately, asking careful questions. How did you know it was really Jesus? What made you risk everything? Can someone like me, could God love someone like me? I realized my life had become a witness. Not something I manufactured, but something I lived. And then one day, 2 years after burning those Bibles, I found myself standing in Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta Airport with a cardboard box at my feet. The same airport. The same terminal. The same place where everything had begun. But this time, the box was full of Bibles. I wasn't forcing them on anyone. Just standing there with a simple sign, "Free Bible, would you like one?" Some people walked past quickly, avoiding eye contact. Others stopped, curious. A few took one, thanked me, moved on. And a few, a precious few, stopped and asked, "Why are you doing this?" And I got to tell them. The man who once destroyed God's word now couldn't stop sharing it. 5 years have passed since that November day when I burned 3 Bibles behind Terminal F. I'm still flying, regional routes across the American South, nothing glamorous, but honest work that puts food on the table and allows me to do what I was called to do. I'm still sharing my story, at churches, conferences, anywhere people will listen. And I'm still growing, still learning what it means to follow Jesus, still discovering depths of grace I didn't know existed. My life isn't perfect. Some days are hard. Some nights I lie awake wondering what my father is doing, whether my mother still prays for me, whether my siblings ever think about their brother who walked away. But my life is purposeful. And that makes all the difference. People sometimes ask me if I regret what I lost. It's a fair question. I lost career prestige, from senior officer at one of the world's premier airlines to a regional pilot most people have never heard of. I lost family approval, my father's pride, my mother's affection, my siblings' companionship. I lost my cultural identity, the Qatari Muslim community that had defined me since birth. I lost financial security, from comfortable wealth to living paycheck to paycheck. I lost friends, colleagues who won't speak to me, childhood companions who see me as a traitor. But here's what I gained. Salvation. Not the uncertain, performance-based salvation Islam offered, where I never knew if I'd done enough to earn paradise. But the certain, finished salvation Jesus purchased on the cross. Peace. Not the temporary peace that came from perfect religious observance, but the deep, unshakable peace that comes from knowing I'm loved regardless of my performance. Purpose. Not the purpose I manufactured through good works, but the purpose God designed me for before I was born. True love. Sarah, who sees all my brokenness and loves me anyway. My church family, who embraced me when my blood family rejected me. Eternal hope. Not the fear-based striving of Islam, but the confident hope that comes from belonging to Jesus. Freedom from fear. No more terror of judgment, no more anxiety about whether I'd prayed enough, fasted enough, been righteous enough. I thought I was trading down. I didn't know I was trading up. Here's the greater truth I discovered, the truth that shattered everything I thought I knew. Islam taught me to earn approval through works. 5 prayers daily. Ramadan fasting. Pilgrimage to Mecca. Quran memorization. Defending the faith. An endless checklist of religious duties, never quite sure if I'd done enough to tip the scales in my favor on Judgment Day. But Jesus offered something radically different, grace. Free, unearned, undeserved grace. His last words on the cross weren't, "Try harder." They were, "It is finished." The work was done. The payment was complete. Nothing I could do would make him love me more. Nothing I had done could make him love me less. It wasn't about striving anymore. It was about surrender. Not religion, relationship. That's what broke me. That's what remade me. If you're a Muslim reading this, hear me clearly, I'm not asking you to abandon your culture or betray your family. I'm not asking you to become Western or give up your heritage. I'm telling you that Jesus is who he says he is. Not a prophet. Not a good teacher. Not a messenger among many. The Son of God. The Word made flesh. The only way to the Father. You don't have to burn Bibles to find out. You don't have to nearly die in a cockpit at 37,000 feet. Just ask him, sincerely, genuinely, courageously, to reveal himself to you. He will. Because that's who he is. And if you're a Christian reading this, don't underestimate the power of God's Word. Those 3 Bibles someone left in that crew lounge, they weren't placed by accident. Someone, somewhere, felt led to leave them there. They probably never knew what happened. Never saw the fruit of their obedience. But those books set in motion a chain of events that changed my eternal destiny. Your faithfulness matters. Your small acts of obedience matter. You never know who's watching, who's listening, whose life might be transformed by your willingness to share the gospel. I still encounter former colleagues sometimes. Muslim pilots passing through Atlanta who recognize me, who've heard the stories. Some are hostile, crossing to the other side of the terminal, refusing eye contact. Some are curious, asking careful questions, probing gently to see if I've really abandoned Islam or if there's some misunderstanding. I plant seeds. Share my story when invited. Answer questions honestly. Then trust Jesus with the results. Because I'm living proof that no one is beyond his reach. If Jesus could reach a man like me, a man who burned his word, who persecuted his followers, who thought Christianity was corruption and blasphemy, he can reach anyone. My life is living proof, Jesus changes everything. That voice in the cockpit didn't just save my life. It gave me life. Real life. Abundant life. The life I'd been searching for through 15 years of perfect religious performance but never found until I stopped striving and started surrendering. Last week, I was back at Atlanta Airport, Terminal F, standing in the same spot where this whole journey began. I had a box of Bibles at my feet and a simple sign, "Free, would you like one?" A young pilot approached, Middle Eastern features, Qatar Air uniform, prayer beads visible in his shirt pocket. He stopped, stared at the box, then at me. You're Karim Al-Nouri, he said quietly. "I've heard about you." I nodded. "Would you like a Bible?" He glanced around nervously, as if someone might be watching. His hand hovered over the box, trembling slightly. "I shouldn't," he whispered. But he didn't walk away. "No pressure," I said. "But if you're curious about who Jesus really is, this is a good place to start." He hesitated for one more eternal moment. Then his hand closed around a Bible. He tucked it quickly into his flight bag and hurried away without another word. I watched him disappear into the crowd of travelers, and I prayed, "Jesus, if you could reach me, you can reach him. Do whatever it takes." What if this is the moment everything changes for him too? What if 5 years from now, he's standing where I'm standing, handing out the very book he once feared? Because when Jesus shows up, he doesn't just change circumstances. He changes everything.